Hey guys, welcome back to episode 3 of the CrossPaths podcast. I'm sitting down with Eric Hickson today. He is the brewer at 3 Brewers in Oakville, winner of the Iron Brewer competition People's Choice Award. As well, one of his beers has won company competitions to be used as a monthly wide beer promo. We're going to sit down, talk to you a little bit today about beer, life paths, and some other cool stuff, guys. I hope you enjoy our show today. Eric, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Awesome.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about why and when you started brewing. Like, how long have you done it for?
So I've been brewing since 2014. So I was in university, and I don't really remember exactly how I stumbled on it. I think it was kind of like a gradual thing. Like, I had heard about home brewing, and I had always thought that might be fun. Like, I always had an interest in cooking, and I always thought those were kind of similar.
Yeah.
But then, I think I just saw there was a home brewing kit available to buy. It was on sale or something.
Yeah.
So I just figured, why not? I'd go for it and tried it out, and it was pretty fun. And then it just kind of built from there. So yeah, I've been home brewing and brewing in general, I guess, for probably about 6 years.
Oh, nice.
Give or take.
What were you studying at the time?
I was a history student.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. That seems like,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of actually history tied into beer, right? Like, I've learned a lot about, how it started, and then the very impurity laws coming in and stuff in my time at Beer Town. But it definitely seems like it's a little bit of a tangent, right?
Well, for me, that was probably the thing that actually got me going a little bit deeper into brewing.
Okay.
When I was in school, I took a class, and it was kind of history of food. It was very like a general history class. But one of the things they talked about was the history of beer. And I had never really thought of beer as like a food, as I think a lot of people tend to be like.
Yeah.
Especially here in Canada, we've got Molson Canadian.
Yeah.
That's basically what everyone thinks of when they
Basically,
think beer.
yeah.
Right. So I didn't really realize that beer went back more than, thousands of years.
Thousands of years ago. It's really old.
And that just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
And then you start reading things, about beer being just as popular as things like tea, and water, right?
Yeah,
One of these
basically.
essential things.
Yeah.
And so realizing that and learning about that, it then led me to do my own sort of course at school.
Yeah.
So it was this thing I did in my final year where you basically you picked a professor who was willing to supervise the course, and then you would pick the subject material. And from there, I decided I wanted to do beer and brewing in medieval and early modern Europe.
Interesting.
So yeah, super obscure.
It's still cool though. I mean, because beer is kind of like, I know they used it in ancient Egypt and stuff too, and it has a lot of history, but it was more almost like a meal, right? And some beers people will say, people will joke Guinness is like eating a loaf of bread or something, right?
Yeah.
That's super interesting though.
Yeah, and then from there, then I just started homebrewing even more, and I started looking up medieval beer recipes and stuff. And then it was after I did the course that I think I then realized this could be something I could do as a job.
Really?
So,
did you have to go to a separate school to do it, or just I can brew and then you can just apply to places that need brewers?
So you can go to school for it.
Yeah.
It depends. Like, a lot of guys, they get their start that way, where they'll go to Niagara College or something.
Yeah.
They'll take the brewmaster course there, and then from there they'll start applying to breweries. Whereas I took a different route where I had the home brewing experience, but I didn't really have any practical hands-on.
Okay.
So when I started in a brewery, it was general labor. That was my title.
Yeah.
And so I would help out with packaging, and I would help clean up. So I was doing a lot of cellarman work.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I kind of worked my way up, and I was working the brew house, and then now, I'm at the level where I'm qualified to brew.
Nice.
So you can get into it with zero experience, basically. Home brewing is definitely the most helpful thing, though.
Yeah, it's like you're willing to learn on your own and try to take some stuff on your own, right?
Yeah.
Was it difficult when you first started? How did your first couple batches go?
Oh, they're brutal.
Really?
So bad.
Don't you need a fuck ton of equipment though? I know all the stuff we had at 3 Brewers. Do you not need all that stuff to do it? Because there's the bit in The Simpsons where Homer's brewing in his bathtub. Is that full of shit or?
Yeah. Well, you can do it with just a pot and some bottles and maybe like one fermenting bucket. So
Okay.
you don't need a ton of equipment,
Okay.
and that's part of the fun too. So when I first got started, I was doing it in my kitchen,
Yeah.
right on the stove top, and then I had
Nice.
one glass carboy that I'd transfer it into, and then once it was done,
Yeah.
put it in some bottles. So you can do it on a budget
Yeah.
for sure. But that's one of the misconceptions with home brewing as well, is that a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to save all sorts of money brewing my own beer, but you're going to dump all your money into equipment, and then you're going to
Yeah.
buy exotic hops and yeasts and
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, it's a hobby that you can really dump all of your money into if you're not careful.
A lot of hobbies kind of seem to be like that, but it's interesting because it gives you a very big outlet for creativity, right? But it's also so scientific.
Yeah, and that's definitely a draw for a lot of people too, is the scientific side of things.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it was more the I guess the human element
Yeah.
of it and how it's tied into human history and everything. But
That's actually
yeah, exactly.
yeah. That's
There's
awesome.
that whole other side. So
So do you see as a brewer, do you see it more as an artistic endeavor or as like or do you like the science of it? Do you see it as like a fusion of both? When you're brewing something for yourself, what do you kind of are you like balancing all the things like you're a chemist or are you painting a picture?
I think it's both, depending on who you ask.
Okay.
So for me, um, if I'm doing it at home, it's definitely more of like an artistic thing, I would say,
Okay.
where I read about an ingredient or something and I get interested in a concept. So,
Mhm.
for instance, I've been really into smoked beers recently.
Okay.
It's kind of the season for it, fall. You get a lot of Rauch
Sure.
beers at this time.
Yeah. A lot of what beer, sorry?
It's called Rauch beer. I don't know if I'm butchering that
That's okay. I
It's a
yeah.
German word.
Yeah, that's fine. What is a Rauch beer?
It's just smoke beer. It's
Okay.
literally just German for smoke beer.
What is a smoke beer?
So, in the malting process, you basically got your various grains. So you have barley, you have wheat,
Mhm.
corn even. But in the malting process, they have to basically wet the grain so it starts to germinate. It's called.
Mhm.
And then once germination begins, they then have to dry it and then kiln it. And so it's in that kilning process that you can either use like an indirect heat source,
Yeah.
or you can use things like smoke. And that's actually what they would have historically used, would have been, to kiln their malt. They would have just had a wood fire. And then that's how they would have kilned it, and it would have imparted this natural smoke flavor because of that.
Okay.
Um, so
And
yeah, smoked beers, they just use a ton of this smoke malt, and it gets a really, really unique flavor that you don't find often.
interesting.
A lot of people describe it as kind of tasting like ham or bacon.
I mean, I like bacon. I like both of those things actually.
Right,
So
right. So it might be off-putting for some, but it's actually really good.
I try it. I mean, I try basically any beer at least once. But you're saying a lot of things like malting and smoking and stuff, and I think most people have no idea what goes into beer. And I think there's a growing understanding now of how complicated beer is. But it's always been like, oh, wine is like the very diverse and like complex beverage. But I think more people are kind of realizing that like beer is deeply diverse. But you're talking a lot about like you like malting and stuff. What is malting? What goes into brewing like a keg or whatever of beer? Can you explain a little bit of the process so people understand exactly how much does go into it and how much variation
Yeah.
there can be in a single beer versus like yeah.
I mean, yeah, like we kind of touched on, that is one of those misconceptions with beer, right? Is
Hmm.
that beer is simple and wine is, it's complex, brother, relative, whatever. But there's a ton that goes into brewing, and it can be extremely complex.
Hmm.
But to simplify it, you basically have four main ingredients in beer. So you have water being probably the foremost, obviously.
Hmm.
And then you have malted barley
Okay.
typically, but that can also be wheat. You could do corn, like I said, basically any grain that you can think of. Oats are used a lot in brewing.
Yeah.
In the malting process, all it really is it's just trying to activate certain enzymes,
Yeah.
essentially, in the grain itself, which is then going to help down the line in the brewing process to extract the flavors, which will then, aid in fermentation. But then
Yeah.
you've got hops as well. Hops typically add a lot of aroma. They add a lot of the bitterness in beer. And then you've got yeast. And yeast is kind of the hidden ingredient that a lot of people forget about. They don't really realize it's there.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually how fermentation occurs. So yeast is a microscopic organism, and it basically metabolizes. So it eats all the sugar that you have from the malted barley,
Okay.
and then it turns it into alcohol. So that's kind of the main ingredients in a nutshell. But from there, you then have variation in those types of ingredients. So we were already talking about smoked malt having a very specific smoky character to it.
Yeah.
But on top of that, you then have things like caramel malts, which have a distinct caramel or toffee flavor to
Mm-hmm.
it. You've got chocolate malt, you've got coffee malt, you've got all these different types of malts that you can use
Mm-hmm.
that are going to add something new to your beer. And then from there, I mean, the different variations in hops, how you use the hops, that can drastically change the flavor profile of the beer. And then even in the yeast, a lot of people, when they think of yeast, maybe they're familiar with baking and they think, oh yeah, it's just like a little packet of dry yeast. You add it in, boom, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
But with brewing, I mean, you've got lager yeast, you've got ale yeast, and then within that, you've got all sorts of different types, which add all sorts of different flavors. So yeah, it's such a complex process.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, when people are drinking beer, they don't necessarily realize all the complexities within that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of the fun of getting to talk about beer and stuff.
Oh, it's great.
Educating people on that, right? So
Does all beer kind of fall into either lager or ale? Like, I know that there's like 100 subcategories at least, like especially in ales, because ales are very diverse, and lagers are the ones people think of when they think that's beer flavored beer. But is every beer either a lager or ale, and from there there's like the umbrella down, or is there other like potential?
So 99% of the time,
Okay.
every beer. I think in certain labs and stuff, there are other brewing yeasts.
Okay.
That wouldn't necessarily be a lager or ale, but those aren't really commercially used. So, it's more just for like scientific research purposes. But yeah, for the most part, it's either an ale yeast or
Okay.
a lager yeast.
Interesting. Now,
Which, ale yeast obviously being like your typical like English ale kind of thing, and
yeah.
then the lager yeast being more of like your the Molson Canadian, that type of beer, like a smooth Pilsner or something.
Yeah. Fair enough. So I think my understanding is, so with a lager, which is what most people think of, they think like Molson Canadian, they think Coors Light, they think like, Budweiser, like light crisp beers. Those beers use like a bottom, like they ferment at the bottom and it's cold temperatures, right? Whereas ales they're brewed at hot temperatures. That ends up and the yeast ferments at the top and at hot temperatures, and that ferments and puts esters like in different aromas and flavors into the beer, right? And ales are just like when I remember you told me once that like Guinness is an ale, and I was like, what? Guinness is an ale? Isn't like a stout a stout? Like what is? And then I realized sours were considered ales, and then that lambics are ales, and all these other styles of beer that like seem like they're so diverse. It's like, nope, those are usually mostly ales. Whereas when I think of like lager, I think there's pilsners, and I know there's Hell's lagers and a couple other styles of lager, but they all kind of have like a very similar. They're like different. Like, I can tell a Heineken's not a Canadian, is not a Millstreet Organic, but they're still like, refreshing, crisp, and like fairly like straightforward beer, and like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. Is that like, ale and lager are two very general, types of yeast, right? Because then within that, you'd have, like you said, you've got like a sour, or like a saison yeast, let's say. And that's technically an ale yeast, but that's going to be very different from an English ale yeast.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to have different characteristics. They're going to have different fermentation temperatures to them as well. And so, within that ale category, it's not necessarily always going to be fermented, say, at the same temperature. If you play around with that temperature, you're going to be able to produce different flavors that at the lower end of the temperature spectrum, let's say, you wouldn't be able to produce.
Yeah.
So if you do it at that higher end, then you're going to get, this big aroma of, of dried fruits or whatever.
Yeah. Super cool.
Yeah.
I love how much there is going on in it. To dial it back to what you were saying earlier, but when you went to college and stuff, you studied history. What was your initial goal going into that, and was it like a total surprise that you ended up doing this instead and following this passion of yours?
Yeah, I didn't have a goal.
Fair enough. No worries. Well, usually someone gets into history,
I
they're
had
planning on
no
teaching,
clue.
right? So there's a reason you probably
Well,
got into history, though, right?
I was always just interested in history.
Okay.
And in high school, they always told you, like, just find something you're interested in, pursue that, and you can figure out a job afterwards.
Yeah.
For me, it was history. That was like the one course that I was doing well in and that I paid attention in. So I decided to go to school for it. And while I was in school, I think initially I figured I would, maybe do like a master's. At one point, I was going to end up working in museums.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe, local museums. So yeah, it was a surprise in the end that I ended up going after brewing.
Yeah.
But it was the first time that I was studying history that, I stumbled across something that I could actually see myself doing.
Yeah.
The museums and all that, they were always like a good idea in theory, but it wasn't something that I felt very
Drawn to.
passionate about. Yeah.
So why were you passionate about beer? What do you like? Can you pinpoint like what about it was like, fuck, this is cool, or is it just that was it for you?
I think I think the fact that brewing has basically been the same for a few thousand years, the same basic concept, the ways that we brew and the ingredients available to us and the quality of those ingredients, those have changed, but at its core, beer is still the same old beer it's always been.
Yeah.
And that concept to me is kind of the mind-boggling part that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So this, it's something that people enjoy today, and it's something they enjoyed 500 years ago, just the same.
Yeah.
You don't get a lot of things anymore that are like that.
Yeah. And yet it's still so cool when at Three Brewers too, and now I'm at Beer Town. You give people a sample and be like, "Oh, I really like that," and be like, "Oh, I don't like that at all." But it's like it is still all beer. Like I have one at work right now that I really like. It's a sour. It's called Mimi Mimosa by Omnipolo. It tastes like orange juice.
Okay.
It's like 7%. It tastes exactly like orange juice. And most people, I'll usually recommend it to girls if they're like, "I don't like beer. What should I try?" I'm like, "Try this. It's really good." But it's just so interesting that people can be like, is still like they're all technically the same drink, but it'd be like, I like that one. Oh, that's fucking gross. I don't like that at all, right?
Well, and that's exactly it. Because then, it's the same people that would say like, "Oh, well, wine has so many different types. There's reds, there's whites, and all these variations, but beer is beer." So that's why it's so weird to me when people say things like, "Oh, I don't like beer." It's like, well, have you tried them all?
There's a lot of beers.
Yeah, how
Yeah.
do you know that?
Yeah, there's so many.
They generalize, right?
And
Think
what?
of the one beer they've tried, and then that's it.
Yeah, I think the first time I had Fruly, like, have you had a Fruly before? Strawberry
Yeah.
beer, yeah, and I was like, "That is this beer? Like, this tastes like strawberry juice." It's very nice. Like you
No,
can
it's
still,
delicious.
yeah, it's very sweet, but it's really really enjoyable. What are you drinking today?
So this is actually a homebrew.
Oh, really?
I figured this would be a fun,
Nice.
fun
Tell me
to
about it.
bring on. So as you can see, it's pretty dark.
Yeah. It's not a stout though. Is that a dark ale, dark lager?
It's just like a brown ale.
Okay.
I initially wanted to make a stout,
Yeah.
and then I looked at what ingredients I had available, and I realized that probably wasn't going to happen. So
Okay.
I settled on a brown ale.
Fair enough. What's
Um,
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's like a traditional English brown ale. I'm using a classic English ale yeast, just SO4, so you get a lot of that, fruity aroma from it, fermented at higher temperatures because I don't really have any temperature control in my house.
Yeah,
So it tends to produce those fruity esters.
that makes sense.
But yeah, it's got the classic caramel, a little bit of toastedness. I had some interesting malts that I could just kind of play around with, and then got decently dark. I'm
That looks good.
pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
But this is the first one I've actually tried out of this batch. So
Are you enjoying it? Is it good? Come out
so
okay?
far so good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I got
Not pumping it at least.
there you go. I got this one. The rep came in from Brew Revolution. They're from Ottawa. It's called all their beers are named after like different like songs from the 70s and 80s. This is House of the Rye Sing Sun. It's a rye golden rye ale. It's really nice.
Nice.
Yeah, you noticed some of that. We had a rye ale. I think when I first started, there was. I think it was the one on the Brewers tap. I think.
Yes.
I
Wurtzenbrow.
Yeah, it was nice. I remember that was pretty good.
Yeah.
It's just interesting how many.
My first Brewers tap.
Really? Oh, so you haven't been at Three Brewers that much longer than I had, really? How long have you been there?
No, I don't think so. 2.5 years.
Oh, okay. I left at about a year and a half, so I guess you had probably just about a year on me and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No, that one started probably, if I'm remembering correct, yeah. Like you started right at the tail end of it.
probably yeah, because I trying to remember. Yeah, because I don't think I remember the name. I just like it's a rye ale we have.
Yeah.
So as a brewer though, where do you see yourself wanting to go? Like, you're working at Three Brewers now. Like, are you very? I'm assuming you're obviously quite happy with your job. But what would be the end goal? Do you want to start your own craft brewery? Or do you want to is your goal to go work at like a Flying Monkey or Cameron's or something like that? Or would you eventually want to go into like non-craft beer? Like I guess working for Labatt. But I mean I guess they probably don't shift it up too much, right? And you probably want to be able to express.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different avenues you can take within the brewing industry. So as a brewer, you have a lot of control over like the end product itself.
Mm-hmm.
But just because you're not doing the brewing itself doesn't mean that you don't have an impact on the beer, right? So some of the larger breweries, they end up having massive sales teams, and they have massive marketing teams, and they all kind of contribute to that end product, right?
Yeah.
But for me personally, I think every brewer has entertained the idea of opening their own brewery.
Yeah.
It's one of those, like dreams.
Absolutely.
Given the current brewing climate in Ontario, there's I think over 400 breweries at this point.
That's insane.
Yeah, so the market's a little oversaturated. So
Yeah.
I don't think it would be something I'd do in the immediate future.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that down the line that wouldn't be an option, because if these 400 breweries can remain open and we can sustain this number,
Yeah.
then it just shows that Ontario does have the appetite for craft beer, which is really, really cool. And it's something that I know when I first got started, it was always something that people talked about, was that, oh, just wait, you're going to see all these breweries starting to close because we can't sustain this many. But the trend has continued over the years. There's just more and more year after year. So I don't know, maybe we can sustain it.
That would be good. Craft beer is awesome. It's interesting. Like, how recently was the shift? Because like I said earlier, there was such a focus on beer being an American style light lager, right? And now all of a sudden you have huge surges in the craft beer scene, where beer is getting genuinely diverse and complex, where you have cream ales, you have oatmeal stouts, you have these raspberry sours, and like hibiscus lagers, and all this stuff all over the place. When did that happen, and how do you think it kind of started growing? What was there a catalyst that kind of pushed it?
Yeah, so it's a fascinating history. I actually just read up on the history of pumpkin beer.
Okay.
And it all
that's seasonal. That makes sense.
Yeah. But basically, in places like Europe, brewing has been, this old tradition that has gone basically unchanged.
Mm-hmm.
Classic examples, the Reinheitsgebot in Germany, which is the Bavarian purity law dictating what ingredients can and can't go into beer.
Wasn't it not even a yeast? Wasn't it just water, hops, and malt?
Yeah.
How did they ferment then? Sorry to interrupt you.
They didn't know that yeast was an ingredient at the time.
Oh, they did. Oh, they just didn't know it was there, but they were putting it in anyway. Okay, I've always wondering. I was like, how is there not yeast? Because I was looking at the ingredients for Stiegel, and it doesn't list yeast, and I'm like, that follows the Bavarian purity laws. But how do you guys ferment your beer?
So they actually had to amend the Bavarian purity.
Oh, okay.
After they discovered that yeast was essential to making beer.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, at least they figured it out.
Yeah, they figured it out. But so, you've got the European context of brewing,
Yes.
which, it was this sacred thing and you don't touch it and you don't change how it's done.
Hmm.
In the meantime, then you've got brewing going on in North America, which was heavily affected by prohibition. So obviously, prohibition basically stopped brewing right in its tracks, for years until breweries were allowed to reopen and people were able to start drinking again. But one of the byproducts of prohibition was that people tended to lean towards lighter, lower alcohol beers. And so this is where the kind of light lager trend of North America began. You also then have, like a rise in corn being used in beer. It
Hmm.
was a cheaper ingredient, but it also made a lighter beer. And so this was kind of the way of beer throughout like the 50s, the 60s, and into the 70s.
Time.
And it was only then that people started to wonder, like, why do all our beers taste the same? Why are they all very light? Why is there little flavor? And so people started to branch out and to explore. And so that's kind of where the whole home brewing movement began. And then craft brewing kind of was spawned from that home brewing movement.
Hmm.
And so that was in the 80s ish in the US, believe it or not. A lot of people always rag on the Americans for having bad beer, but they're
Yeah,
kind of the ones who invented some of the best beers.
that's probably true,
um,
actually. Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
Huh.
But yeah, it all kind of stemmed from this curiosity to try something beyond just the standard light lager that everybody was used to for so long.
Yeah.
And then from there, yeah, then as soon as that Pandora's box was kind of open, then people started throwing pumpkins in, they started throwing strawberries in, they just started going crazy.
Fuck the Bavarian purity laws.
Yeah, honestly.
Apparently, if you're throwing a lot of fruits in beer, when do you put that in at the end? How does that work? Because you can't malt the fruit, can you? Like, how does?
So it depends. I mean, if you wanted to add certain fruits into the boil, let's
Yeah.
say in the brewing process, that'll get different flavors than if you add fruit at the bottling stage, let's say.
Hmm.
So if you add like a fruit puree, a lot of the times when we do it at Three Brewers, we'll actually add the fruit right into the bright tank right
Okay.
before we transfer in.
Yeah.
So we've got like a finished beer, and then we blend in that fruit with it, and then that'll impart like a very very prominent, say, apricot flavor.
Ooh.
But you can also add it in fermentation. It's all sorts of different times and places you can add.
It's actually really neat how it's just so funny that there's such this conception that it's very very simple in the beer is beer, but it's like no, you can actually do all these different things and at all these different times, and it can affect all the different things. And yet,
Yeah,
it's still most beers taste still like beer, but the little subtleties and stuff are super super awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's another fun thing as a home brewer that you can experiment with. Is if you really want to, pinpoint the difference between adding hops at the 30-minute mark of your boil in comparison to the 10-minute mark of your boil.
Yeah.
You can make split batches. You can do like a side-by-side brew, and then you can do a comparison.
Hmm.
And then you can really see. So, yeah, there's just so many different ways that you can play around with things.
If you were going to tell someone, like, if someone had like a minimal palate for beer, would you give them like is there an outline that you could say like here's like the style of beers you could try to go through to develop a palate, or how do you develop like a more at least more acute palate towards beer to be able to tell not the difference between like obviously an amber and a brown, which are vast, but like a brown and a Guinness, for example, or like a Guinness from a cobblestone. How do you build that palate, and where would you go from like someone who's just drinking Coors Light?
I think I think for your typical lager drinker, something like Coors Light or Canadian, I think you want to start small. So you
Hmm.
want to do kind of baby steps. You don't
Yeah.
want to go from a Coors Light into a Rodenbach or something.
Yeah.
That might scare someone away. So I find if they're not really used to drinking these intensely flavored craft beers like your IPAs and your sours,
Yeah.
start with something a little more familiar. So everybody's, or most people at least, have tried like an English ale, for
Yeah.
instance. And an English ale is going to be different enough from your light lagers that you will be able to detect some difference.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these European beers, you've got like your wheat beers or your Weiss beers in Germany and everything, and different English ales. Those tend to be a very good bridge, I find, for people to move from doing just like your normal light lagers into eventually getting to these more flavorful craft beers.
Yeah. I love wheat beer. I like it, like it's slightly citrusy. I like it with an orange. They're really, really nice. I don't know why wheat beers pair so well with an orange, but that's the color, so it just seems like it makes sense.
It's
but
the color. It's a lot of the flavor compounds in the yeast as well.
yeah.
They just I don't know what it is about it. It just pairs amazingly with orange.
Do you like Erdinger?
I love Erdinger.
Erdinger's nice. I actually think that's one of the easiest of the wheat beers to get into. Whereas like I think a lot of people might not like a shock top because it's very citrusy. Erdinger's almost like a light wheat beer, so it still has some of that like depth to it, but it's not so aggressive like a Belgian Moon or a shock top or even a Kronenberg Blanc. Really nice.
Yeah. Erdinger's it's great beer. It's a really big beer in Germany. They love it as well.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they invented the Weiss beer, basically.
Yeah.
So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I haven't had they have the Erdinger Dunkel, too. We have that in bottles, but I haven't tried it yet. I don't know what it's like. It looks good.
You should try it.
I should get that?
If I know you like your dark beers.
Okay. Yeah. I was so sad to hear that 3B got rid of the brown.
Oh, my God, I know.
Yeah.
That's my favorite one.
It was mine too. The brown and the white actually, like two opposite ends of the spectrum, but those are my favorites. What are you guys pouring right now for your seasonal and your monthly?
So for right now, it's been interesting at 3B. Obviously, we've had reduced seating with COVID and everything.
Yeah,
so
unfortunately.
Tried to be strategic with putting beers on tap, and when we brew them, we don't want to brew too much in the event that we potentially get shut down.
Yeah.
So anyway, currently we have as our feature beer, we have a blood orange rye IPA.
Ooh.
Which is very nice. It's a nice session ale.
Yeah.
So it's not super bitter or anything, but it's got a very distinct orange flavor to it.
Can you tell people what session? Because people say session IPAs. Can you explain to the people might be listening what a session ale means?
Sure. So
what an IPA is.
So session basically just means if you've ever heard the phrase crushable. People say that.
Okay.
It means the same thing. So in a drinking session, you can have multiple of them without it being too overwhelming. So people say things like, "Oh, Guinness is a meal," right? Guinness would not be sessionable.
Yeah.
You can't have more than one.
It actually doesn't have a lot of calories though.
No, it doesn't.
I always thought Guinness was actually kind of light, especially Guinness here. Apparently, Guinness in like Scotland has a lot more, or like Scotland Island has more like heft to it. But like I've always found it actually compared to Cobblestone, much lighter.
Yeah, it's one of those like weird placebo things I think where people see the color, and they assume like, oh God, this is going to be a super heavy beer.
Yeah.
So sessionable just basically means that you can have multiple of them without feeling full or without feeling like overwhelmed. So sessionable beers typically have like lower alcohol, so they'll be in like the 4% range. They won't be super bitter. They won't be too aggressive.
And lower ABVs even for an IPA.
Yeah.
So a session. What does an IPA mean?
So IPA is India Pale Ale. And a lot of people, they assume IPA equals bitter, but that's not necessarily the case either. Usually IPAs just want to showcase hops in one way or another. So, you get a lot of bitterness in beer from hops, but hops can also contribute a lot of aromatics. And so our Brut IPA, which we currently have on tap, that's not bitter at all. It's all added, all the hops are added in the fermentation side. Mm-hmm. So you get, these big aromatics of citrus. So it kind of goes against people's normal conception of what an IPA is, which is, this really overwhelmingly bitter beer. But it's not always the case. But IPA is India Pale Ale, and it's usually going to be showcasing hops in one way or another.
So I heard that with IPAs, they ended up becoming more bitter because the hops assisted in the aging. So when they had to come across the seas, they were able to keep longer. Is that why they end up becoming more, like they're usually known for being more bitter?
So there's a lot of debate about this.
Okay. The history stuff is it's really cool that you know the history side, because I actually think that's really interesting, and
Well, and a lot of people would argue that that's one reason why IPAs, were more popular, is because they could last that long journey. They
Hmm.
typically had higher alcohol and they had higher bitterness,
Okay.
both of which were going to add to the preservation of the beer as it
Hmm.
made this long voyage. But one thing that I found when I was researching English IPAs was that typically in the 1800s, when they first started, making a lot of IPAs, they would age the beer in a barrel for up to 2 years, and so it kind of goes against the whole thing that, oh, it's going to spoil. We gotta put all this alcohol in it, put all these hops in it so it
Yeah.
can last, and then consume it. Right? They were aging these beers for 2 years, and then they were shipping it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of debate, but that was certainly part of the IPA's history,
Hmm.
since it did have more of those preservatives, if you will, in it. Then it was preferable for longer journeys, as opposed to like an English mild, which is down to like 3%. Let's say that's going to go off a lot sooner than your IPA.
How long does beer keep for actually? Like, what's the variance? Like, if I have like a Mill Street in the fridge, how long is it gonna last?
Typically, if you've got the beer in the fridge, and if it's from like a larger commercial brewery,
Hmm.
you can get 6 months easily
Oh, okay. So I
out
wouldn't
of
want
beer.
to. I'm pretty sure I have like a 12 minutes to Destiny from like it's from Flying Monkey, it's sitting on my shelf from a couple years ago. I should not drink that
Is it in a can or a bottle?
bottle.
Okay, bottle, you might be okay.
Oh, really? From a
Yeah,
couple years ago? Okay, because it's a
yeah.
lager, so I wasn't sure.
So with bottles, and that's a whole other realm in the brewing world, where people will bottle age certain beers.
It ages in
Um,
the bottle still too. Like, I mean, I assume it could still
yeah,
go bad and stuff, but like, is it still developing like flavor and stuff while it's sitting in a bottle?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. A lot of flavors. It's popular to do in really really intense beers like
Okay.
barley wines,
Interesting.
where people, yeah, they'll age them for 5 years before they crack it open.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, if you're buying a beer from like the LCBO or the beer store, yeah, it can probably last you a good 6 months. If you're getting a home brew from a friend, maybe a few months.
Okay. Fair enough.
And then if you're picking it up from a brew pub, let's say, then at that point it all really depends on how they're packaging it.
Okay.
Um,
Now, I know that I know that like some like they can age in casks and stuff. Like you can age it in like a rye cask. Like they're even aging beer in like wine casks as well. And I think I heard someone like I think I saw something like on our like coming up thing like a wine beer. Is that a thing that or did I mishear something?
as far as I know, Three Brewers isn't doing anything like
Mm.
that. I know in the past they've done.
Is it a thing? I mean, like I'm talking about for like my
Oh,
upcoming at Beer Town. They mentioned something I saw like on the on deck. Like on deckers are like coming up on a rotational. Something
right.
mentioning a wine beer. And I'm like, what the fuck is a wine beer?
Yeah, so it's becoming very popular.
Okay.
Where, so say you want to have like Innocent Gun, where they have like their whiskey barrel aged beers.
Yeah.
So the whole premise is that they basically take the beer and then they put it into a whiskey barrel, and then some of that flavor from the barrel as well as from the whiskey that was in the barrel then gets imparted into the beer.
Okay.
And so for wine, it's the exact same concept. So you basically get a wine barrel and you put the beer in that, and the same thing happens where you're going to get some of the flavor from the wine, some of the flavor from the barrel, and it's going to create this entirely new, type of beer.
Ooh.
Then when you consider, there are certain hops, for instance, that have characteristics similar to certain wines. And so that then, sparks the imagination of brewers, where they go, okay, well, I'm going to use all these ingredients that kind of taste sort of like wine. I'm then going to age the beer in wine barrels,
Yeah.
and we're going to have some weird fusion of beer and wine potentially.
Yeah. Wine is just
And
the
then,
two. Sorry, go ahead.
oh well, one other really really obscure style that I recently just heard about for the first time. I think it's called an Italian Grape Ale,
Okay.
but it's literally using grapes inside the beer, and so it is supposed to be the fusion between wine and beer.
That's pretty cool.
Um,
Because
yeah,
wine is just the
yeah,
two, right? Grapes and water.
yeah. Grapes, water, and then they're using
Oh yeah,
yeast
there
as
is
well.
yeast too. But yeah, beer adds the malt, and there's a lot you can do with the malt. And I guess there's no hops and stuff in wine, obviously, right? Like I
Right.
guess like grapes would kind of be the equivalent of malt to if you're drawing a comparison, maybe. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Either
So
that or the
yeast is
hops.
the thing providing the sugar, which then gets fermented into alcohol. In beer's case, then for wine, yeah, the grapes are the thing providing the sugar.
Does
That
does
gets,
beer have to have hops in it?
I think technically, like legally, if you want to sell beer, yes, it needs to have
Why?
hops in it. I don't really know the reasoning,
Okay.
but I do know, like in Ontario, for instance, they have some guidelines and some rules about what can be considered beer, what can be considered, whiskey, for instance.
Hmm.
So beer, it needs to have hops, it needs to have some kind of malted grain, and then I think beyond that, you can then kind of experiment. But then, there's also a rule. So for it to be considered whiskey, it needs to be aged in a barrel for a minimum of 3 years.
Okay.
Or aged for 3 years.
That's a whole other can of worms, talking about like whiskeys, like rye, scotches, bourbons. I love bourbon, but like even those are so like again like a lot of diversity, so much to do in the aging and all that stuff. It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but technically, if you want to consider it a beer, yes, it needs to have hops in it.
Okay.
Uh,
Interesting.
So I used to work at another brewery, and we made it was a mead braggot, and so mead obviously coming from honey, but the braggot side means that it's kind of like a mix between a mead and a beer.
Hmm.
And so we would make a beer as like a base, and we'd add very, very minimal hops, just like a handful basically, so we could call it a beer.
Yeah.
We didn't want any bitterness, we didn't want any of that. So we added whatever we had to.
And now it's
you
a
mix
beer.
that with our mead that we made, yeah, and now you've got yourself a mead braggot.
Okay, so mead is not beer. I was gonna ask that way earlier, but I totally forgot.
Yeah,
Mead is
not beer.
What is mead? It's like honey, right? Like fermented honey drink. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had it once. I did not care for it. I found it very intense. I like honey too. I put honey in my coffee. I did not care for care for the mead.
Some meads can be way too intense. They're like super sweet, or I don't know. I find sometimes as well, it's just it'll be like 12%. It's not really
Yeah.
a cup of tea.
Yeah.
But mead braggot, I really enjoy. I think that's very tasty.
What is mead braggot?
So that's when you get that, you have your beer and
Oh, okay, yeah.
you mix them together.
That sounds like it. That would actually be good. There's one that I like at Beer Town right now. It's called Kona Big Wave. It's an Italian. Sorry, not Italian. Hawaiian. I don't know why I said Italian.
Oh yeah.
Hawaiian beer. It's golden ale. It has like a little bit of the honey crispness to it. It's very nice. I really enjoy that. It's a good, crisp, relatively light ale. Really good, smashable, sessionable. Yeah, sessionable beer. It's very nice.
Well, and that's why I think mead braggots are so good, because honey is one of these dominant flavors that you get in certain malts.
Yeah.
And so just like with those wine beers where people are taking, certain ingredients used in brewing that are reminiscent of wine.
Yeah.
And then they're mixing it with these wine barrels. It's a similar thing where, brewers can take ingredients that are reminiscent of honey.
Yeah.
So like this Kona Big Wave.
Yeah.
Got these flavors of like honey or like graham cracker.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, which pairs really, really well with honey. So mixing a mead with those ingredients, it
Makes sense.
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember your the honey drop. If you guys all reference the honey drop is the beer that Eric made that won the company, I guess, choice for one of our beers of the month. Like when I was at Three Brewers, about I want to say like last year in November or October or so, something like that.
Yeah, last November.
Yeah, last November, and it was a honey ale, right?
Yes.
But it was so interesting that it was really, really good, but it was still fairly polarizing. A lot of people were like, "Oh, that's." I remember I had one table. It's like, "Oh, I don't like that at all." I was like, "Okay, well, we're selling it." And it's like, "That's fine, fuck you." I was like, but it was a great beer. Like I thought we sold a ton of it, right? We almost ran out of it, and it was cool because you could every pint $1 went to saving the bees, so you could tell people like, "Guys, you're drinking and you're doing community service, you're doing charity, so you're helping out."
Yeah, exactly. No, that was an interesting one. I didn't expect it to be that popular.
Yeah.
Initially, my concept was to do one of these mead braggots. And, thinking, okay, maybe we'll get some like local honey and everything.
Yeah.
And eventually, it evolved into it turned into this honey lager. And
was it a lager? I thought it was an ale.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Technically,
Technically a lager because of the.
we fermented on a little bit of the high side.
Okay.
So it's like a weird hybrid.
Okay.
It was a lager that we treated almost like an ale. But yeah, we ended up selling out in like the first week and a half, something.
Yeah, and I think you had to make more, didn't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you must have had to start making more because I guess like it takes. How long does it take to actually make most beers? Because most people don't have any idea how long beer takes to make.
So depending on the type of beer you're making,
Yeah.
it'll dictate how long. But typically for ales, it's anywhere between like 3 to 7 days.
Okay, so that's actually pretty
And
quick.
right, a pretty quick turnaround time. But for a lager, it's usually somewhere between 2 weeks to 6 months,
That's
depending
pretty
on the
insane.
type.
I
Yeah,
know we had a couple. We had loggers pretty rarely. People always ask me, like when I was at Three Brewers, like, "What's like a Canadian?" I'm like, "I guess technically the blonde, because we never had loggers, but even the blonde was not like that. Like the blonde was very fruity. It was like it had a ton of aroma. It had like a nice, like light sweetness to it, just a touch citrus. It was really, and it had like better bitterness too than a Canadian for sure.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
really good. I loved the blonde. It was great.
Yeah, lagers are one of those things that, they're very, very popular and people will always want them. But it's tricky when you're a brewery because one thing that you're always limited by is your tank space. And so you're only going to have so many tanks that you can
Yeah,
brew into. And the benefit of brewing ales is that they have a quicker turnaround time.
yeah.
So, you can brew an ale every 5 days, whereas with a lager, you're brewing that every 3 weeks potentially. So if we're talking volume, then you can get more brewed within a year by brewing ales as opposed to lagers.
That makes sense.
And
And if you're
that's
busy,
strictly from
yeah.
like a business standpoint. But for us, yeah, when we were brewing blondes basically every week, we didn't necessarily have the tank space to afford, to give a tank and dedicate it as a lager tank, for
Yeah.
instance. Right. So it's one of those tricky things, but
Have you been able to still work as much? Like I assume, like if there's not as much business, that I still need you like in as often to like be brewing beer. Have you basically like, and also like I was wondering too, like with when they just opened for takeout, like what was your role then?
yeah, so I've been pretty fortunate throughout this whole thing. I've been working. I've kind of during the whole takeout side of things, I was helping, sometimes in the kitchen, helping sometimes
That's
with the
good.
actual like takeout, like helping the front of house and everything.
Yeah.
But luckily, we also started doing packaged beer,
Yes.
which kind of saved us because we're now able to do growlers and we're doing cans and we've got howlers, which are basically just like a smaller
Yeah, and the markup on
growler.
them is good, so it helps a lot, right?
Yes, yeah. Um, but it's also been able to move more beer that with these restrictions we don't have as many people coming in,
Mm-hmm.
so we got to get it out of the building somehow.
Yeah, basically.
Um, so yeah, I've been fortunate throughout this whole thing where I've still been brewing, certainly not as much,
Mm-hmm.
but with that in mind, since we are also doing things like canned beer, I now have to spend more time actually canning the beers, and I have to spend more time cleaning the growlers.
Yeah.
So we lost a little bit of our brewing, but then we've gained a little bit with the takeout and delivery.
Oh, that's good then. As
Yeah.
long as you're like still able to like accommodate and shift, I think that was a pretty strong narrative for a lot of people. Like the first little while of lockdown, like I was obviously at work as like a bartender server. There was no work for me, right? But after a certain amount of time, you kind of have to like, if especially like people who are still out of work, you kind of have to like figure out, okay, what can I do with my time?
Hmm.
Because like I think if you're just kind of like sitting there, and it's hard, like for the first while, everyone's kind of confused and scared, but you have to kind of make your own success and make your own path, because it can't be good for people to be sitting at home that much and shut in, right?
Yeah, and I was home brewing during the
That's good.
like the month that I was at home.
Yeah.
I took that opportunity.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, definitely.
My girlfriend had started like doing like, because she wasn't able to go back to work, so like a couple months ago she just started doing home baking, and she started selling it, and her page is I think at like 4 or close to 500 followers now. I can't remember exactly where, but like she started doing orders.
Nice.
She got like, she's making macarons, right? I don't know if like you're familiar with baking, but macarons are notoriously difficult to bake, right? They're very fussy. So she's also been, another endeavor that's like equal parts chemistry, and then there's the artistic side as well. And there's a million things that can go wrong in making them, and like they crack, they fucking they look hollow. I don't know. But yeah, she'll message me and just tell me how fucking headachy it can be and stuff. But she's gotten really good at it. But
I had a chef buddy who during the lockdown he started baking as well.
Yeah.
But he was doing sourdough.
Okay. I fucking love sourdough.
Oh, it's so good.
It's the best.
He'd keep his sourdough starter going.
Yeah.
And so he would have like 4 loaves of bread in a day. And then he would just like drive around the neighborhood dropping off loaves of bread at people's doors.
Nice.
But yeah, from the start of lockdown till like right around the end before he went back to work, there's a big difference in the quality of his sourdough because he had nothing going on. So
you get to practice.
Just got lots of practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Basically, yeah. You have to kind of like make your own hobbies, make your own pastime and stuff. And it's good that you're able to practice your craft. Like that's literally you. Excuse me, in your time off, right? In the extra time you had, not time off if you were still working, but you know. Yeah, that's good. What is there styles of beer you prefer brewing more than other styles, or like I'm like excited to like make a blonde or make this like wheat beer or whatever else?
I think any IPA is usually a lot of fun.
Why?
There's usually just like so much involved.
Okay.
In IPAs, so they'll have a complex malt bill to try and amp up some of the alcohol, or they want to add maybe a drying quality or whatever.
Yeah.
Or maybe they want to have a darker IPA or something. So you can still play around with the malt bill, which is fun. And then obviously the hops become super, super fun because not only are you trying to figure out what types of hops to use, but then you're deciding when to use them.
Yeah.
Right. So say you want a super, super bitter IPA, you can add a ton of hops early on in that boil process.
Yeah.
Or say you want like a really aromatic one, you can then add a bunch of dry hops. So yeah, I think IPAs are probably one of the funner styles to brew just because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah. I'm finally starting to get a little bit into them. I didn't like IPAs for the longest time. I just found them I'd always joke with my tables. I'm like, guys, I think people that say they like IPAs are lying. I just found them too bitter. And people would usually laugh, and some people would like the guy who's ordering an IPA would like usually either laugh or be like, but but now that I've had I've had the opportunity to try like new beers. Like we have like 10 beers on rotation and 30 beers on tap at Beer Town, and I've tried them. I think all of them at this point, but like the 10 rotationals change all the time. So you give them a sample, give them a little bit of a taste and stuff. And now I'm trying to try some more IPAs, and I'm like, I could probably drink this, especially with a meal. I could, if you have something salty, it's really nice. And I tried like one that I actually quite liked. There was Amsterdam's Hazy Town was very good. And I tried, I think it's by Left Field Greenwood IPA. It's a little lighter. It's actually really nice. I really enjoyed it. I think Andrew came by to visit me. He tried one. He was like, "This is too light for me," but I was like, "It was pretty good for me." I really enjoyed it. And then sours are an entirely other world, right? Because like they genuinely just taste like warheads, or like.
Oh yes, some of them can just be so overwhelming.
Yeah, we have like one that's like our collaboration series that you can only get here, and it's called like Bay Kettle Sour by a brewery called Storm Stayed. It's a raspberry blackberry sour. It's quite tart, but it's actually really good too. But when I first tried a sour, I was like, oh god, and then you go back and you're like, okay, and then you like try it again and you're like. Oh, that's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it's definitely an acquired thing. Like,
yeah.
I don't think there's a single person that just like right off the bat loves IPAs.
Yeah.
Maybe the odd one here and there. Same with sours as well, where it's just like such an intense flavor.
Yeah.
That people typically don't dive into that and love it immediately.
It's interesting that Three Brewers, at least in my year and a half there, never did a sour. Do you think that's probably because, like, as a European or a French-owned company, they're a little more traditional with things, and sour is a little more new and like forward-focused in terms of like more craft beer? I think like sours are getting very popular in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because sours have their origins in Belgium, and so they are
lambics, right?
Yeah, and so they are traditional over there. Mm-hmm. And even a lot of French beers, like a lot of saisons, kind of have that like sour characteristic to it. But I think the main reason why a lot of breweries, and not just Three Brewers, tend to kind of steer clear from sours is when you're brewing a sour, you can run into a lot of issues.
Okay.
And the issues will kind of extend beyond issues with that particular beer.
Hmm.
They might potentially cause issues for all of your beers moving forward.
Really?
And that's one of the weird things about sours is that
Why?
specifically
Why are they so
you're using,
dangerous?
well, Brettanomyces is like the big bacteria
Okay.
that breweries will use. And it basically inoculates the beer with this bacteria, which then gives it that sour taste. But it's such a potent, powerful bacteria that if your cleaning regimen isn't perfect, and I mean like hospital level sterilization,
Okay.
then this can potentially infect your entire brewery.
Holy shit.
And you
Okay, that
find
makes
out
sense.
about
Oh
it.
shit.
It's in the walls, it's in the floor, it's in the wall sockets. It's
What's the
everywhere.
bacteria called?
It's called Brettanomyces.
Is this just in sours or this in all beer?
It's not necessarily in all sours. It's in a lot of sours.
Okay.
You've probably heard of like Brett beers.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and so those are beers that use Brettanomyces.
Okay.
And a lot of breweries are horrified of using this stuff because there have been horror stories where, a brewery thought, yeah, we'll just mess around. We'll do a one-off beer. It'll be a Brett
And then they
IPA.
fucked everything and then they had to
And then
close.
from there on in, all their beers have Brett in it.
And you got
There's nothing you can do. You just
it
have
does
to
it
move.
what does it like is it not work in other beers? Does it taste bad? Makes every beer sour or what?
It can, but I mean, say you're a brewery that has, a flagship blonde, flagship
Ah,
wheat
okay.
beer, right?
Yeah.
And then you try and go back and make those again,
It's
and
like,
you're
nope, you
screwed.
fucked it up, buddy.
Yeah, you're done.
Brettanomyces got you, you dumb idiot. Oh
So
no.
we've experimented in the past. We use lactobacillus, which is it's like
Okay.
another souring bacteria.
I heard we had a sour before I started, yeah.
Yeah, but the way we did it, it was a very like safe way of doing it.
Okay.
Where we isolated basically where the sour pitch where it was getting added into, and
Yeah.
then we boiled it. So
Interesting.
that it killed any bacteria that may have still been
Okay.
alive.
That's
So
kind
we
of
kind of
interesting.
hedged our bets, yeah,
Huh.
on infecting the rest of the brewery when we made that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Brettanomyces, that's a big one. So that's specifically why we don't make.
Okay, that's actually really interesting. I had no idea. I genuinely just thought it was because it was just a little more classical styled, but I totally forgot that lambics and like a lot of sours did start in Belgium. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Then they
No,
got
it's out of fear. That a lot
okay,
of people
out of
don't make.
fear, and then there's American wild ales, which are like sours, but they're not sours or something because they use a
Well,
wild
so-
yeast and they're like tart.
Yeah, so the whole wild ale thing is cool too. And that also kind of has its origins back in Europe. But the whole idea with a wild yeast strain is that yeast, it exists basically everywhere.
Okay.
Right? So it's technically a fungus. It's microscopic, so we can't see it.
Yeah.
But it exists on all sorts of things. So, a lot of fruit, on the skin of a fruit, you
Yeah.
have wild yeast
Yeah.
that just survives. And so what these breweries will do that want to make a wild ale is they'll basically brew their beer.
Mhm.
They'll leave their fermenter open.
Okay.
So it'll be open to the elements. They'll open up a window and then they'll go home. And they'll just leave
Interesting.
it. And they'll just wait for something in the breeze to
Nice.
literally fly in and start fermenting their beer.
We had one that I liked. One of my other bartenders was like, "This is the worst thing I've ever tasted." It was called Jam Hands. I can't remember who made it. Oh, it was. I thought it was great. It was an American wild ale. I thought it was really pleasant. It was like pinkish red, but not like a deep red. I thought it was really nice. But she's like, "That is the grossest beer I've ever had." I'm like, "Wow." But she liked Lindemans, and I found Lindemans their lambic the cherry Lindemans was like very like tastes like kids medicine. Like cough medicine.
Yeah.
I didn't care for it. It replaced our Fruity, and I was very sad about that. But oh well, that's okay.
Yeah, a lot of so the old school European breweries that make wild ales, they'll use something called a cool ship.
Hmm.
And basically what it is if you imagine a really, really big table,
Yeah.
and it's really, really long, it takes up like an entire room. It's not very deep. It's normally only like a foot or two deep. But basically, once they're done the boiling process, in the
Okay.
brew, instead of sending the beer through something called a heat exchanger,
Yeah.
which basically it sends cold water through and it cools the beer down. So when you then want to pitch your yeast,
Hmm.
it's then at a temperature that it's not going to kill the yeast.
Okay.
So instead of using that, they basically will just put their beer into this big tray, this huge table, like room-sized tray, and they'll allow it to just cool down in this table.
Yeah.
And then they'll just leave it, and they'll leave it open to the elements, and then things will just kind of hop into it
And just see what happens.
Yeah, and there's some really cool videos if you ever have any spare time on just going in a wormhole on YouTube.
Most of my spare time is wormholes on YouTube.
But you can see really cool like time-lapse videos of breweries. I think it's Bench Brewing.
Okay, actually, we have a couple. We just had their Strawberry Grove. It was awesome, and we have. I think we still have. What I can't remember what it's on our number 4 on rotation. I can't remember what it is. It's also pretty nice, but I really like their Strawberry Grove. It was good. And then we have another one I can't remember on top. Yeah.
And they're in the perfect spot for all that.
Clean Slate is our other one we have. Yeah.
Like fruits and everything.
Yeah.
They're in fruit country in Niagara, so.
Oh, is that where Bench is from? I should know that.
Yeah, they're.
I honestly, we have 40 beer, I guess 30 statics and stuff, but like trying to remember where all the breweries are from is still very difficult. And I've been, like 2 months in, I'm still like, oh, shit, I need to know where the fuck is this brewery from?
Yeah, that'd be a nightmare. I have a hard enough time with 7.
I can basically probably name all the beers. Like if I had to, like if you gave me like a few minutes, I could go through all of them in my head and like imagine them. But like trying to remember where they're all from is like I know most of them now, but every once in a while I'm like, where is this from again? Shit.
Yeah, especially when you're changing them up all the time too.
Well, the 10, the 10 is hard to keep track of. Like sometimes we'll have like one of the rotationals for like a few days. Like we had Cameron's from Oakville. And they had Captain's Log. It was a lager. We had it and it's a lager, so we demolished it in like 3 or 4 days. It was just gone.
Right.
Whereas we'll have something like a stout. Like we have a stout on our fusion tower right now, so we'll fuse it with it's like kind of like a little bit like casking, not quite. So it'll have like a regular pour, and then it'll have like a fusion pour, which comes out flatter but fused. And like it's a stout right now, so it'll go a little bit slower because not as common, right? And sometimes we'll have an IPA, and like it'll like go pretty quickly too, right? We had Voodoo Ranger by I can't remember who did Voodoo Ranger. Anyway, yeah, it was nice. It was another good one too, right? And fusing it with oranges and stuff, yeah.
That's got to be a challenge though, for sure. Right, when you have so many different taps, is making sure that you're moving through that product, before it's kind of gone off, before it's not at its freshest.
Yeah, it's exactly. And you try to people always ask well, what do you have on tap? And I'm like, I'm literally not even supposed to just tell you. You tell me what you like, and I have to kind of guide you in the right direction. That's why paddles are a big thing. Obviously 3 Brewers does paddles as well, whatever you want to call them. Et ceteras, whatever we called them there. But we call them paddles at Beertown. And you kind of just try to guide people in the right direction to be like, okay, you like Canadian. Okay, well, I'll obviously recommend you Milford Organic. I mean, I guess I have Coors Light in bottles, and people still come to Beertown to get Coors Light in bottle, which it kind of does confuse me a little bit because I'm like, you're just paying more. Probably because the location in Oakville, it's going to be a little probably maybe 50, 70 cents more maybe. Yeah. But I'm just we got a lot. You could get a 3-speed, which tastes almost the same, just a little bit heavier from Amsterdam, and it'd be better value, and it's also it's a little bit nicer beer. But some people are very, very, very straightforward on what they want to drink, and they don't want to diverge at all.
Yeah, I find that's something that we come across a lot too. But especially with an older generation, those were kind of the days where you had your brand of beer.
Yeah, and that was what you did. And they all taste kind of the same. Budweiser and Canadian, not very different. Coors Light, not it's lighter, but it's not very different, right? But it's that's just the brand you go with,
Swear by
Pabst Blue Ribbon, whatever, right? Shitty college beer, right? But go ahead.
Yeah, it's those guys that they have their one brand, and they've drank that beer for 30 years, and that's all they're going to drink. They're not going to change, and that's all they want.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's hard when those guys come in and they ask for a Coors Light, and you have to give them a blonde, and they're still disappointed.
I remember one customer. This is at 3 Brewers, I think at least a year ago now, and he's like, "Can I get a Stella?" I'm like, "No, we're actually a microbrew. We don't carry Stella. We have I have a blonde that's quite similar." And he's like, "That's stupid." I was like, "Okay." So I was like, I'll give you a couple minutes to look at the menu. I come back and he's like, so I can't get a Stella. I'm like, you're right, now you can. We're no longer a microbrewing. The 2 minutes that I've rotated around the bar. What, like, I'll be right back. And like, no, man, he got wine. I'm like, just get a sample of the blonde. Like, I mean, if you don't like it, you don't
Just
like
try
it.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're a little bit like samples at Beer Town. Like we can't just like because we can't just let people sample everything. We have a law, right? But it's still like you want to sample some beer, like just let me know. Like we got so much stuff. Try it. It's fun. Beer's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
I don't know. Some people, I think they just, they don't care about beer and they don't want to care
yeah,
about beer. They don't want to think about it. I'm not sure, but
that's fair.
they're missing out. And that's what
Yeah.
I think.
Do you have a favorite beer, or like do you have like a couple like favorites that you're at least enjoying right now,
So I think
barring your
locally,
home brews,
yeah, barring the home brews,
barring regular ones that make yourself?
I think locally, probably my favorite. It's been my favorite for a few years. Is the black lager from Silversmith.
I think we had that actually briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good.
So they're from Niagara on the Lake.
Yeah.
It's a pretty small building. It's actually built into like an old church. So they
Yeah,
still have like some of the cool like stained glass and everything in the windows.
I should have gone
Um,
there when I was in Niagara with my girlfriend for her birthday, but we did a wine tour and I was like exhausted afterwards. So,
right.
but like next time I'm in Niagara. But anyway, sorry, go on.
But it's just yeah, it's a very very consistent beer.
Okay,
Every time I've had it, it's always been delicious.
nice.
Yeah, it's a solid Schwartz beer, so just like a dark lager,
Hmm.
as the name implies.
Yeah,
But I think right now, I've been obviously, like I said, really into the smoke beers,
yeah.
and it just being kind of fall winter. I've been getting a little more into like porters and stuff again.
We have a couple. Yeah.
Yeah, like there have been some good cherry porters that I've
Ooh.
seen recently, which are always really nice.
We had
Cherry
a
porter, vanilla porter.
porters aren't bad. We had a sour porter from Fairweather that I was like a little bit like offended by. It was very very out there because it was a porter, but then it was like very sour, like black cherry sour, but like a porter. It was some people really liked it, but I was like, oh my god, what is this?
Yeah,
But that's what's interesting about it, right? Like that's there's nobody likes all the beers.
no, I don't like all beers. I'm
No,
a brewer.
yeah,
Some I think are gross.
yeah, but that's okay though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is that I don't like Berliner Weisses really.
yeah.
Some people think I'm crazy for it, but that's just my
Which
personal
one? Sorry.
Berliner Weiss.
What's a Berliner Weiss? Sorry.
So it's like a lower alcohol sour.
Okay.
It's similar to a sour. A lot of
Yeah.
times they're flavored with fruits.
Okay.
I don't know. To me, it's just not really my thing. But that's something people will come into Three Brewers and they'll try one of our beers, and they'll get all apologetic if they don't like it.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't really care
Yeah.
if you don't like it because I don't assume that you're gonna like everything.
Yeah.
You know,
Not all
I don't
things are
like
for all
everything.
people. Not all things are for every
Right.
palate, right? Yeah. You know.
And different strokes for different folks, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's the fascinating thing is that there's usually a beer for everybody.
Yeah.
There's so many different types.
That's the thing. I'm like when people tell me they don't like beer, I'm like at least let me bring you some samples. Like try some
Yeah.
stuff. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But like whatever. Just give it a shot, right? It can't hurt you.
Don't knock it till you try it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So before we wind down here, I want to like tie a little bit back into like speaking about like passions and life paths and stuff like that. So when you're working, like, do you really feel like you're at work? I'm assuming you still feel like you're at work, but like, do you feel like joyful? Like, how does like a workday feel for you most of the time? Would you say going in, and getting to brew beer? Because it seems like you really have like you've talked here like nonstop about like different styles of beer. You have a deep knowledge of it, which to me correlates to a deep passion. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think I think any job that you have, you're always going to have a little bit of that feeling from time to time. But for me, I don't know. It's always very rewarding getting to go in and just assess what's coming up in the next few weeks.
Hmm.
What are the new beers that we're putting on tap, and that's kind of the thing that always keeps me interested and then kind of keeps me so passionate and involved, I guess. Is that I'm constantly learning something new, which
Hmm.
is I think another thing that's always drawn me to beer. But I think generally speaking, I'm fortunate, very, very fortunate to have a job that I enjoy and for it to be something that I am passionate about. I mean, the fact that I brew at home, it's a testament that it's definitely something I enjoy.
Absolutely. If you're doing your job at home,
Yeah,
that definitely means that you really, really care about it and really enjoy about it. What would
yeah, and
you?
don't get me wrong, it can be very hard work.
Yeah, of course.
That's
I see you clean. I saw you cleaning the vats. I'm like, that seems like it sucks.
yes, a lot of people they think brewing is, you're going to be brewing beer all the time, but the reality is it's about 20% brewing and 80% cleaning. Um, now, I also happen to get a bit of a kick out of things being very clean,
That's fair. I hope so.
so it works nicely for me.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think by and large, I definitely don't get that feeling like I'm doing a 9 to 5 grind or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's definitely a different sort of job.
That's awesome. Would you give any advice to people trying to like figure out like how do you find a passion like that, or how do you like get into it? Is there anything that you could say like that kind of worked for you, or?
I think for me, it was, I just kind of dove into it. I
Hmm.
didn't really, I didn't really have any hesitation.
Yeah.
I was interested in homebrewing and I just went for it. I didn't think about whether I was going to be bad at it or whether I wasn't going to like it.
Yeah.
I kept kind of an open mind and figured like, yeah, I'll give it a try,
Yeah.
see what this is all about. And, I've had that mindset throughout my career, I guess, as a brewer is, just kind of dive in,
That's awesome.
feet first, I guess.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, I think with anything in life, there has to be a level of abandon and a level of, you know, let's just fucking do it kind of attitude,
Exactly.
right?
You're always going to have that self doubt, or you're going to, second guess yourself, and you're going to say, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this, or maybe I can't do this, or, whatever you might be thinking. But I think half the battle is just getting up in the morning and doing it.
Nice.
And then I think the rest kind of comes from there. So,
That makes sense. So for you as a brewer and as someone like, if you see it as a piece of art, a piece of science, and a piece of yourself, is there any stamp you want to leave, like, like let's say 20, 30 years from now and you're still brewing? Is there any kind of piece of yourself or any like impact you want to make on the world of craft beer when you're finished with it?
yeah,
I know that's a very big question.
that's some long term thinking.
Yes, if you don't have to like think so far ahead. If you're just like if there's something that about yourself like or about you that you kind of like want to do, like can you think of anything like that?
So one thing for me, I think a big draw to beer for me has always been that it's kind of like an everyman drink. It's that everybody can enjoy it and it is for everybody. And
Yeah.
I think it is something that should be shared
Hmm.
and enjoyed with people. And so I think for me, the part of myself that I always try and put into my beers is I do try and put a little sense of fun into maybe the name or
Yeah.
just into the concept or something.
Yeah, I remember you
Because
doing that with. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
yeah, I always try and put some kind of reference to comedy or something stupid into it.
Yeah. What was your
Just to kind
Simpsons
of keep
one called
things.
again? You had a Simpsons one. I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah, it was the Australian Pale Ale, and it was
Chad
like
Wazers. Chad
yeah,
Wazers. Yeah, that's a weird name for bullfrog. That's a weird name for a Chad Wazer.
yeah. I'd have called them Chazwazes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fun though.
but I don't know. For me, yeah, beer has always been one of those just kind of like fun things to share with people,
Yeah.
just like comedy is. I always have kind of seen that parallel, I guess. So for me, yeah, I always just try and instill that sense of fun
That's awesome.
into beer.
Yeah.
As serious as people can get about it, and as serious as people can get about the brewing process itself and everything, at
Yeah.
the end of the day, I do think it's something that people should be enjoying, right?
Yeah.
And having fun with it is part of that. So,
That's a really good answer. I like that a lot. Yeah, I always thought like especially even with your casks and stuff at 3B like they usually had like some I remember you did one with like Reese's Pieces in it or something like that. That was pretty
yeah, something
cool.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. Like I mean like you get to
Thankful.
just try new stuff, right? It's an adventure, you know?
My next Brewers tap, I'm calling it the Creamy Elephant.
Oh, okay.
which is another reference to a British comedy show called Peep Show.
Okay.
Anyone's familiar with that? But as far as I'm concerned, I'm always going to name beers that have some stupid comedic reference to
That's
it.
fantastic. Well, it's like the one I was like, was drinking House of the Rising Sun. Like they're like references and stuff in craft beer is fairly popular, right? And if you're going for like specific comedy references, that's pretty cool, right? Like for if you have your own brewery one day, and when you're making your own stuff right now at 3B, you're able to express what you like through your beer, right?
It's always very satisfying when somebody's
gets
familiar with the reference.
Yeah.
They get it. That's one of the best feelings.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, when you make it like a silly reference, people are like, huh, that was good. Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you try to tie the name into the beer itself?
Yeah, normally there's some tie. So like with the Australian Pale Ale.
Yeah, that one makes sense, right?
The
Yeah.
Australian episode of The Simpsons, right?
Yeah.
With this next beer I'm making, Creamy Elephant. So it's going to be an English mild. So the English comedy and everything, but milds are also normally like a very smooth kind of beer.
Okay.
They're called like a small beer. So small, just really talking about the alcohol. But they say they're small beers with big flavors. So I don't know. Creamy Elephant.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Right.
When I think.
But yeah, I think as well yes, it was my English IPA that I called the Trojan Rabbit.
Oh, I remember that one. That one was pretty popular, actually. Trojan Rabbit.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the name was from, though.
So that's a Monty Python reference.
Oh, okay. Very nice. Yeah.
So again, with the whole English IPA and English comedy.
Monty Python's great. I love Holy Grail. Really fun movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like as far as hobbies go, do you just is brewing at home like your main hobby, or do you have other stuff you like to do like when you're not doing that, when you're not doing work?
Yeah, I mean, I like music a lot. So I play some instruments, which is always fun, just kind of mess around.
Nice.
But I still am a big history nerd, so
nice.
I do like reading history, and I also like fantasy and all that fun stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't game as much as I would like.
Yeah.
But I'm still very interested, so I try and stay as like up to date and current as I can with gaming stuff. But
yeah, gaming, I find it's like the older you get, and like you're married now and everything, your time for free activities becomes like diminished as time goes on. So you kind of have to cherish your free time when you can. It is always nice when your partner or when your life accommodates what you're able to do. Like with you're able to do brewing, which is something you clearly have a passion, and it's a hobby for you, but it's also your career, which is really cool. But yeah, then there's all these other things and stuff, and it's interesting how time becomes sort of limited and stuff, as opposed to when we were like 15 and you could just do everything.
You just had 6 hours at a time that you
basically
could play
yeah
Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah, or WoW and stuff for some of my friends. I never got into it, but I know like they just crushed it, right?
I lost so many hours to WoW.
Yeah, so many hours. Time wasted. Time enjoyed is never time wasted, is what they say, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
But that's awesome.
Yeah. No, it's funny because like you said, in recent years with age, you don't have as much time to actually, sit down and do these hobbies. And so I find myself, if I'm eating breakfast or something, I'm reading about a video game.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of when I was like a little kid and I was watching my brothers play video games.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really playing. I was just kind of playing the game vicariously through someone else.
I think that's like the trope of all younger siblings and stuff. My sister will probably say the same. And yeah, anyone who's had older siblings, that's like, no, it's my turn. It was always your older sibling's turn.
Absolutely.
I'm sure my sister would echo similar sentiments.
Yeah, it feels a lot like that now, where I'm not playing the games, but I am still playing them just by reading about other people playing.
Well, that works. That's all right though. Yeah, I still like trying to game when I can. I definitely do have less time and less energy to do it in the same way. But like when quarantine started for me, like I was training jiu-jitsu like 3 or 4 times a week. And obviously you couldn't do that when this whole thing started. So I was like, the fuck to do with all my time and energy. So I decided to start streaming and doing some of this and stuff like that. But our biggest hobbies and our biggest passions always seem to call back to us, right? Like, so as soon as I was able to start going back to the gym, I was like, okay, I need to find a gym, I need to find a social circle of people that I can grapple with and stuff like that. But yeah, it's you kind of have to force yourself to find a place to put your energy, right?
Yeah, you need some kind of that outlet.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I mean,
Deeply essential.
First thing I did when quarantine started, I think it was actually like the first Saturday, is I homebrewed.
Nice.
I was like, well, I got to get this out of my system somehow. So.
Were you off work at all for any time?
Yeah, I was off work for the second half of March and then most of April.
Oh, okay. I guess because when they weren't open for takeout, there was nothing you could do, right? Because the restaurant was just empty, nobody was in there. That makes sense. Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm glad you're able to figure that out. That's awesome, and it's just cool that it was it ties so. I mean, it doesn't, not even to say it ties. It is what you do, and that's why I kind of wanted to bring you in and sit you down, because I think and what I'm trying to do with and through my podcast and with all the avenues that I'm trying to focus on right now is find people that follow passions and find people that are focused and love what they're doing. And the thing that I could always tell and perceive about you is anytime I'd sit down and ask you tell me about the beer, you'd go off, and it was awesome. And it's just this person who's so clearly passionate about what they do. You could talk to people who they're marketing devs, they program, they do business stuff, and work is just work, right? It's utility. But when you're doing your job, when you're working, and it's you're just excited and you're beaming and stuff, that's what I'm interested in, because I think people are missing that. I think people want that. I think people want to have something that they love doing.
And I think it can definitely annoy some people. I know it annoys my wife when I just go on and on and on about the different beer styles and everything. Yeah. But no, I know for me personally, I've had other jobs, and I know I don't really do well in those jobs. It's not something that I particularly care about.
Yeah.
So I know for me, I'm the type of person that I need to be doing something that I really am passionate about. And I think this kind of thing is useful for people to get different examples of, how people can pursue what they're passionate about. I know for me, I didn't really have any of those examples in my life.
Yeah.
So it was really, it was uncharted territory that I kind of just had to figure out on my own. So no, I think this is really cool what you're doing, helping people.
Trying to
figure out their own path. Yeah.
And it's to help me too, right? As I'm trying to figure out how can I figure out for myself, where I see myself most in this world, and what do I want to do, what do I want to bring in, right? It's cool to be able to surround yourself with people that are they're on their path. They found what makes them happiest in this world, right? And you have you found a great partner, and then you have a job, a hobby, a passion that satisfies all these other aspects, your creative aspect, your focus, your scientific side. There's something powerful in that, and there's something very cool about it. And being able to connect with people on something that they can just talk about at length is very, very awesome, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, my dog.
No, that's okay. I just heard. I was like, oh, your dog might need your attention soon. So I won't keep you too much longer, though. But yeah.
No, it's definitely something that I realize how lucky I am as well in that, because there are so many people that they'll go their whole life when they don't necessarily find that thing. So I am very fortunate. For sure. So.
Good stuff. I'm really glad you're able to find that for yourself. I think we're probably at a good time to call it. I think we're at just shy of an hour and 30 minutes right now.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's been really fantastic talking to you, Eric. I really, really appreciate you sitting down with me. I think this was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me on. I'm happy to help people out. Hopefully.
Absolutely. I think whoever's listening has probably learned a lot more about beer than they ever expected. I know I learned a ton, and I thought I knew a fair bit, but I've definitely learned a lot. So hopefully other people learn even more. And I really appreciate it, Eric. Thank you so much for taking the time. Okay.
Yeah, well, impress your friends and colleagues with your new beer knowledge.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Okay. Be well. Okay. I'm gonna come try to. I'm gonna try to come visit Three Brewers. I think this weekend. But you're probably off. I think you're usually off on the weekends. But I'm sure I'll see you when I see you.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Have a great night. Okay. Cheers.
All right, thanks. You too.
Be well. Later.